Roswell, alien interview, about the source of material in this book. The content of this book is primarily excerpted from the letter, interview, transcripts, and personal notes I received from the late Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy. Her letter to me asserts that this material is based on her recollection of communication with an alien being who spoke with her telepathically. During July and August of 1947, she interviewed an extraterrestrial being who she identifies as Airl, and whom she claims was and continues to be an officer, pilot, and engineer who was recovered from a flying saucer that crashed near Roswell, New Mexico on July 8, 1947. Obviously, anyone reading anything about this most famous or infamous of all flying saucer or alien encounter events must necessarily be highly suspicious regarding 1. The authenticity of the report, and 2. The credibility of the source of information, especially when it appears for the first time after 60 years after the alleged event. I received the aforementioned letter from Mrs. MacElroy on September 14, 2007, together with a package of documents. The package contained 3 types of documents. 1. Handwritten notes in cursive on ordinary lined 8.5 by 11 inch school notebook paper, which I assumed had been written personally by Mrs. MacElroy. 2. Notes typed on a manual typewriter on plain white 20-pound bond paper, which I am assuming were prepared personally by her. At least both had the appearance of having been written in the same handwriting and or typed in the same typewriter consistently throughout. The writing in the notes I received also appeared to be the same as the writing on the address and return envelope of the manila envelope I received from Navan, Ireland, which was postmarked on September 3, 2007. Since I am not a forensic expert or handwriting analyst, my opinion in these matters is not a professionally qualified judgment. 3. Many types of typewritten transcriptions of her interview with the alien. These were obviously typed on a different typewriter. These pages were typed on a different type of paper and showed apparent signs of age and repeated handling. None of these notes were assembled in any particular order or by date except were indicated by a sentence or paragraph of preamble or explanation by her, or by extrapolation from the context of the pages. Voltaire is quoted as having said, "History is a Mississippi of lies." According to the comments made by the alien in the interview transcripts supplied by Mrs. MacElroy, the fundamental lesson of history is that many, many gods have become men, but very few men, if any, have returned to being a god again. According to the alien being Airl, if anything he, she, or it supposedly communicated can be trusted, and if the translation or interpretation of this alleged communication is accurate, the history of this universe is a river of lies, down which the might and freedom of all-powerful godlike immortal spiritual beings ended and was lost in a sea of matter and mortality. Furthermore, according to the very direct and undiplomatic statements made, which seem to express the personal opinion of the alien, if one were traveling the far reaches of the universe in search of a place called Hell, it would be an accurate description of Earth and the inhabitants in its current condition. To further compound, complicate, and magnify the incredible source of the interview transcripts I received from Mrs. MacElroy is the fact that they are 1. Based almost entirely on telepathic communication between the alien and Mrs. MacElroy. 2. Many of these interviews discuss paranormal activities of immortal spiritual beings. Of course, most scientific authorities are unwilling to acknowledge or perceive spiritual phenomena of any kind. The dictionary definition of the word paranormal is, adjective, 1. Cannot be explained by scientific methods. 2. Supernatural or seemingly outside the normal sensory channels. By definition, people who use the word paranormal are 1. Not able to explain spiritual phenomena, and 2. Spiritual phenomena are outside of their normal sensory channels. In short, scientists suffer from the inability and or unwillingness to perceive and or explain spiritual activities. Therefore, the discussion of spiritual activities or spiritual universes in this book are expected to be understood only by those who can and will perceive such things. According to the time spans related by the alien in several of the interviews, there are a number of compelling and heretofore unknown reasons that suggest the possibility that many extraordinary miscalculations have been made by Earth scientists regarding the origins and antiquity of the universe, Earth, life forms, and events. Of course, these may or may not be accurate either, as time and its ugly stepchild, history, are largely subjective. However, it can be observed that, by contrast with interstellar or macrocosmic time, the historical perspectives of residents of Earth is limited to a relatively microscopic period of time compared to what are considered to be recent times in the chronology of a space travel civilization, much less the entire span of the universe. The geological record of Earth is reckoned by the best guesses of scientists to be about 4 billion years. The antiquity of Homo sapiens in the archaeological textbooks is estimated at only a few million years at most. Even the entire biological spectrum is considered to have existed on this planet for only a few 100 million years, and by and large the personal memory of individual beings on this planet is limited to only one lifetime. All other dates, events, or interpretations of events cited in this book are from terrestrial sources, which are purely subjective observations, conjectures, or inventions of human beings, including those of the author, and must therefore be credited or disregarded by the reader accordingly, considering the penchant of Earth inhabitants to myopia, egocentricity, and general ignorance of the several universes in which we dwell. This book is intended to be an informal presentation of information provided to me 60 years after the fact of a series of interviews between an alien spacecraft officer, pilot, and engineer and an Army Air Force surgical nurse. Roswell, Alien Interview, Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, Biographical Information. Since I have never met Mrs. MacElroy in person and spoke to her over the phone only once for about 20 minutes, I cannot vouch personally for her as a credible source of information. In fact, I can't factually substantiate that such a person actually existed, except that I did speak with her on the phone and I received a handwritten material in the mail which was sent from a physical address in Ireland. When I spoke to her on the phone in 1998, I was living in Florida. At the time of our brief phone interview, Mrs. MacElroy lived on Scotty Pride Drive in Glasgow, Montana. I know this because I mailed a copy of my book, The Oz Factors, to her as a gift after it was published in 1998. I'm sure she received the book because she refers to it by name in the letter received from Ireland and says that she read it. I did a little research on the internet about Glasgow, Montana for my own interest. Glasgow was founded in 1887 as a railroad town that became popular during the 1930s because President FDR requested that Fort Peck Dam be constructed there, which became a huge source of employment for the Glasgow area. In the 1960s, the population flourished up to 12,000 because of Glasgow Air Force Base, SAC, which was used during the Vietnam conflict and the early part of the Cold War. The base was deactivated and closed in 1969. When I talked to Mrs. MacElroy on the phone, she mentioned that she had been relocated there by the U.S. Air Force after her service was completed, and that's where she met her husband, who was an engineer. I don't think she mentioned his first name. However, he worked on building the Fort Peck Dam, which created the massive Fort Peck Lake. Although the dam was finished in 1940, he was a great fisherman and outdoorsman, so he stayed in that area. I gathered that the Irish heritage of the place had something to do with it, but didn't pursue that point with her. I haven't been able to find any record of a MacElroy who worked for the dam, but the personnel records from that period are virtually non-existent as far as I can determine. I contacted her during my research for the Oz Factors book because I was led to believe, through a very circuitous line of investigation, that this woman was suspected of having been involved with alien contact at Area 51 or the Roswell crash site or something similar. Through a sequence of circumstantial inferences and accidental referrals, I actually found her number in the phone book and called her up just on the chance that there might really be such a person. Needless to say, when I called her, she was less than forthcoming in her response to my questions. However, I think she was impressed by my genuine and innocent sincerity to get information for my book and realized that I had no nefarious or financially motivated purposes or reason to exploit her in any way. Nonetheless, she did not give me any useful information at that time, except to say that she had been in the Army and was stationed in New Mexico in 1947. She could not discuss anything whatsoever about any kind of incident, as her life depended on remaining silent. Although this piqued my interest even more, it was futile to try to push her any further, so I gave up and forgot about her until last September when I got the package from Ireland. I tried to contact her in Ireland at the return address on the package, but received no reply from her. Nor have I been able to find anyone in Meath County, Ireland, who was acquainted with either of them except the landlady from whom they rented a room for a few weeks before their deaths, which seemed to have occurred simultaneously, although I have no real evidence of this. However, the postmark on the envelope she sent to me was stamped at the post office in Navan County, Meath, Ireland, on the date cited above. Since there is an actual residence, according to Google Maps, at the return address shown on the envelope, I wrote to the address and was advised by the homeowner that both Mrs. MacElroy and her husband, whose name turns out to have been Paul, were both recently deceased. She said that the cremated remains of Mrs. MacElroy and her husband were interred at St. Finian Cemetery on Athboy Road. Subsequently, I have not been able to find any record of her under the maiden name of O'Donnell, nor have I had any success at discovering any personal friend, family member, or document to confirm her birth, medical education, or military record, marriage, or death, with the exception of the landlady in Ireland, who is not a relative, just before her death. I suspect that this is the false identity given to her by the military when she left Roswell, as mentioned in her notes. In either case, it seems that her identity and all evidence of her has been expunged from the public record. I understand that certain government agencies are adept at covering up evidence or making records and people disappear. It seems likely that this has to be done in her case due to the highly sensitive nature of the Roswell incident and consistent with the rest of the alleged cover-up. Inasmuch as I do not have any further information to verify or substantiate that any of the notes of these interviews sent to me by Mrs. MacElroy are in any way factual, other than what I have already mentioned, let the reader beware and take heed accordingly. Chapter 1. My first interview with the alien. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy personal note. By the time the alien had been returned to the base, I had already spent several hours with her. As I mentioned, Mr. Cavett told me to stay with the alien since I was the only person among us who could understand her communication. I could not understand my ability to communicate with the being. I had never before that time experienced telepathic communication with anyone. The non-verbal communication I experienced was like the understanding you might have when a child or dog is trying to get you to understand something, but much, much more direct and powerful. Even though there were no words spoken or signs made, the intention of the thoughts were unmistakable to me. I realized later that although I received the thought, I did not necessarily interpret its meaning exactly. I think that the alien being was not willing to discuss technical matters due to the nature of her position as an officer and pilot with the duty to maintain the security and confidentiality required by her own unit or organization. Any soldier who is captured by the enemy in the line of duty has a responsibility to withhold vital information, even in the face of interrogation or torture, of course. But in spite of that, I have always felt that the alien being was not really trying to hide anything from me. I just never got that feeling. Her communication always seemed honest and sincere to me, but I suppose you can never know for sure. I definitely feel that I shared a unique bond with the alien. It was a kind of trust or empathy that you have with a patient or a child. I think it was because the alien could understand that I was really interested in her and had no harmful intention. Nor would I allow any harm to come to her if I could prevent it. This was true too. I refer to the alien as her. Actually, the being was not sexual in any way, either physiologically or psychologically. She did have a rather strong feminine presence and demeanor. However, in terms of psychology, the being was asexual and had no internal or external reproductive organs. Her body was more like the body of a doll or robot. There were no internal organs, as the body was not constructed of biological cells. It did have a kind of circuit system or electrical nervous system that ran throughout the body, but I could not understand how it worked. In stature and appearance, the body was quite short and petite, about 40 inches tall. The head was disproportionately large relative to arms, legs, and torso, which were thin. There were 3 fingers on each of 2 hands and feet, which were somewhat prehensile. The head had no operational nose or mouth or ears. I understand that a space officer does not need these, as space has no atmosphere to conduct sound. Therefore, sound-related sensory organs are not built into the body, nor does the body need to consume food, hence the absence of a mouth. The eyes were quite large. I was never able to determine the exact degree of visual acuity of which the eyes were capable, but I observed that her sense of sight must have been extremely acute. I think the lens of the eyes, which were very dark and opaque, may have also been able to detect waves or particles beyond the visual spectrum of light. I suspect that this may have included the full range of the electromagnetic spectrum, or more, but I don't know this for sure. When the being looked at me, her gaze seemed to penetrate right through me, as though she had X-ray vision. I found this a little embarrassing at first, until I realized she had no sexual intentions. In fact, I don't even think she ever even had the thought that I was male or female. It became very obvious after a short time with the being that her body did not require oxygen, food, or water, or any other external source of nutrition or energy. As I learned later, this being supplied her own energy, which animated and operated the body. It seemed a little bit eerie at first, but I got used to the idea. It's really a very simple body. There's not much to it compared to our own bodies. Airl explained to me that it was not mechanical, like a robot, nor was it biological. It is animated directly by her as a spiritual being. Technically, from a medical standpoint, I would not say that Airl's body could not be called alive. Her dull body is not a biological life form, with cells and so forth. It had a smooth skin or covering which was gray in color. The body was highly tolerant to changes in temperature, atmospheric conditions, and pressure. The limbs were quite frail, without musculature. In space there is no gravity, so very little muscle strength is needed. The body was used almost entirely on a spacecraft or in low or no gravity environments. Since Earth has a heavy gravity, the body was not able to walk around very well, as the legs were not really suited to that purpose. The feet and hands were quite flexible and agile, however. Overnight before my first interview with the alien, the area had been transformed into a buzzing hive of activity. There were 12 men working on setting up lights and camera equipment. A motion picture camera and microphone and tape recorder was there, also set up in the interview room. I don't know why a microphone was needed, since there were no verbal communications possible with the alien. There was also a stenographer and several people busy typing on typewriters. I was informed that an expert foreign language interpreter and a code-breaking team had been flown to the base during the night to assist with my efforts to communicate with the alien. There were also several medical personnel, specialists in various fields, to examine the alien. And a professor of psychology was there to help formulate questions and interpret the answers. As I was just a nurse, I was not considered to be a qualified interpreter, even though I was the only one there who could understand anything the alien was thinking. There were many subsequent conversations between us. Each interview resulted in an exponential increase in the understanding between us, as I will discuss later on in my notes. This is the first transcript, with the answers to a list of questions provided to me by the intelligence officer at the base, which I debriefed to the stenographer immediately following the interview. Official transcript of interview, top secret. Official transcript of the U.S. Army, Air Force Roswell Army Airfield, 509th Bomb Group, Subject, alien interview, July 9th, 1947. Question, are you injured? Answer, no. Question, what medical assistance do you require? Answer, none. Question, do you need food or water or other sustenance? Answer, no. Question, do you have any special environmental needs such as air temperature, atmospheric chemical content, air pressure, or waste elimination? Answer, no, I am not a biological being. Question, does your body or spacecraft carry any germs or contamination that might be harmful to humans or other Earth life forms? Answer, no germs in space. Question, does your government know you are here? Answer, not at this time. Question, are others of your kind going to come looking for you? Answer, yes. Question, what is the weapons capability of your people? Answer, very destructive. I did not understand the exact nature of the kind of arms or weapons that they might have, but I did not feel that there was any malevolent intention in her reply, just a statement of fact. Question, why did your spacecraft crash? Answer, it was struck by an electrical discharge from the atmosphere, which caused us to lose control. Question, why was your spacecraft in this area? Answer, investigation of burning clouds, radiation, explosions. Question, how does your spacecraft fly? Answer, it is controlled through mind, responds to thought commands. Mind or thought command are the only English language words I can think of to describe the thought. Their bodies, and I think the spacecraft, are connected directly to them through some kind of electrical nervous system that they control with their own thoughts. Question, how do your people communicate with each other? Answer, through mind, thought. The words mind and thought combined together are the closest English language words I can think of to describe the idea at this time. However, it is very obvious to me that they communicate directly from the mind, just as she is communicating with me. Question, do you have a written language or symbols for communication? Answer, yes. Question, what planet are you from? Answer, the home, birthplace world of the domain. Since I am not an astronomer, I have no way of thinking in terms of stars, galaxies, constellations, and directions in space. The impression I received was of a planet in the center of a huge cluster of galaxies that is to her like home or birthplace. The word domain is the closest word I can think of to describe her concept, images, and thoughts about where she is from. It could as easily be called the territory or the realm. However, I'm sure that it was not just a planet or a solar system or a cluster of stars, but an enormous number of galaxies. Question, will your government send representatives to meet with our leaders? Answer, no. Question, what are your intentions concerning Earth? Answer, preserve, protect property of the domain. Question, what have you learned about Earth governments and military installations? Answer, poor, small, destroy planet. Question, why haven't your people made your existence known to the people of Earth? Answer, watch, observe, no contact. I got the impression that contact with people on Earth was not permitted, but I could not think of a word or idea that communicated the impression I got exactly. They are just observing us. Question, have your people visited Earth previously? Answer, periodic, repeating observations. Question, how long have you known about Earth? Answer, long before humans. I'm not sure if the word prehistoric would be more accurate, but it was definitely a very long period of time before human beings evolved. Question, what do you know about the history of civilization on Earth? Answer, small interest, attention, small time. The answer to this question seemed very vague to me. However, I perceived that her interest in Earth history is not very strong, or that she did not pay much attention to it. Or maybe, I don't know. I really didn't get an answer to the question. Question, can you describe your home world to us? Answer, place of civilization, culture, history, large planet, wealth, resources always, order, power, knowledge, wisdom, 2 stars, 3 moons. Question, what is the state of development of your civilization? Answer, ancient, trillions of years, always, above all others, plan, schedule, progress, win, high goals, ideas. I use the number trillions because I am sure that the meaning was a number larger than many billions. The idea of the length of time she communicated is beyond me. It's really closer to the idea of infinity in terms of Earth years. Question, do you believe in God? Answer, we think. It is. Make it continue. always. I am sure that the alien being does not understand the concept of God or worship as we do. I assume that the people in her civilization were all atheists. My impression was that they think very highly of themselves and are very prideful indeed. Question: what type of society do you have? Answer: order, power, future always, control, grow. These are the closest words I can use to describe the idea she had about her own society or civilization. Her emotion when communicating her response to this question became very intense, very bright and emphatic. Her thought was filled with an emotion that gave me a feeling of jubilation or joy, but it made me very nervous also. Question: are there other intelligent life forms besides yourself in the universe? Answer: everywhere. We are greatest, highest of all. Due to her small stature, I'm sure that she did not mean tallest or biggest. Again, her prideful nature showed through in the feeling I received from her. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, personal note. This was the conclusion of the first interview. When the answers to the first list of questions were typed and given to the people who were waiting for them, they were very excited that I was able to get the alien to say anything. However, after they finished reading my answers, they were disappointed that I could not understand more clearly. Now they had a lot of new questions because of the answers I received to the first list of questions. An officer told me to await further instructions. I waited several hours in the adjoining office. I was not allowed to continue my interview with the alien. However, I was always well treated and allowed to eat and sleep and use the restroom facilities whenever I wanted. Eventually, a new list of questions was written for me to ask the alien. I gathered that quite a few other agents, government and military officials had arrived at the base by this time. They told me that several other people would be in the room with me during the next interview so they could prompt me to ask for more detail during the interview. However, when I attempted to conduct the interview with these people in the room, I received no thoughts, emotions, or any other perceptible communication from the alien. Nothing. The alien just sat in a chair without moving. We all left the interview room. The intelligence agent became very agitated about this. He accused me of lying or making up the answers to the first questions. I insisted that all my answers were honest and as accurate as I could make them. Later that day it was decided that several other people would attempt to ask questions of the alien. However, in spite of several attempts by different experts, no one else was ever able to get any communication at all from the alien. Over the next several days, a psychic research scientist from back east was flown to the base to interview the alien. Her name was Gertrude something or other. I don't remember the last name. On another occasion, an Indian clairvoyant named Krishnamurti came to the base to try to communicate with the alien. Neither one was successful at getting the alien to communicate anything. I was personally not able to communicate telepathically with either of these people either, although I did not think that Mr. Krishnamurti was a very kind and intelligent gentleman. Finally, it was decided that I should be left with the alien by myself to see if I could get any answers. Chapter 2, my second interview. In the next interview, I was told to ask the alien only one question. Official transcript of interview. Top secret. Official transcript of the U.S. Army Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, 509th Bomb Group. Subject, alien interview, July 10th, 1947. Question. Why have you stopped communicating? Answer. No stop. Others. Hidden, covered, secret fear. The alien cannot communicate with them because they were afraid of her or did not trust her. And it is clear to me that the alien is not aware that some people have secret intentions toward her and are hiding their real thoughts. It is equally obvious to me that the alien does not have even a tiny bit of fear of us, or anything else for that matter. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, personal note. I pondered the words I chose to convey the meaning of the alien's thoughts very carefully before reporting to the stenographer and the people who were waiting anxiously in the other room. Personally, I never suffered any fear or misapprehension about the alien whatsoever. I was very, very curious and excited to learn anything and everything I could about her and from her. However, like the aliens, I did not have much trust or confidence in the agents or authorities who were controlling my interviews. I had no idea what their intentions toward her might be. However, I am sure that the military officers were very, very nervous about having an alien spacecraft and pilot on their hands. At that moment, my greatest worry was how to more clearly understand the thoughts and ideas of the alien. I think that I was doing pretty well as a telepathic receiver, but not as good as a telepathic sender. I wanted desperately to figure out a better way to communicate with the alien, in a way that would enable the growing legion of government officials to understand her more directly, without having to rely on my interpretation of her thoughts. I did not feel very well qualified to act as an interpreter, yet I was the only person with whom the alien would communicate, so it was up to me to get the job done. I was also becoming acutely aware that this was probably the biggest news event in the history of the Earth, and that I should be proud to have had any part in it. Of course, by that time the entire incident had been officially denied in the press, and a cover-up of immense proportions by the military and the powers that be had already begun. However, I was beginning to feel the pressure of the responsibility for being the first person on Earth, as far as I knew, to communicate with an extraterrestrial life form. I think I know how Columbus must have felt when he discovered a new world the size of a continent on one small planet, but I was able to discover an entirely new unexplored universe. While I waited for my next instructions from my superiors, I went to my quarters under escort of several heavily armed MPs. Several other men dressed in black suits and ties accompanied me also. They were still there when I got up in the morning. After breakfast, which was brought to me in my own quarters, they escorted me back to the office at the base that was used for the interview. Roswell, Alien Interview, Chapter 3, My Third Interview, Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, Personal Note. The third interview and all subsequent interviews that I had with the alien were observed and recorded, as I mentioned above, by dozens of other people. Although they were not physically present, a special room had been constructed with a window of one-way glass through which the interview could be observed from an adjoining room without intruding on the alien. The alien had been moved into a newly constructed room and was seated in an ordinary overstuffed living room chair covered with a flowery fabric. I'm sure that someone had been sent into town to buy a chair from the nearest available furniture store. The alien's body was about the same size as a very thin 5-year-old child, so she was dwarfed by the chair. Since her body was not biological, it didn't need any food, air, or heat, and apparently she didn't sleep either. There were no eyelids or eyebrows above her eyes, so the eyes didn't close. I don't think anyone could tell whether she was sleeping or awake as long as she was sitting upright in the chair. Unless she moved her body or gestured with her hand, it would be hard to tell whether she was even alive or not unless you could perceive her thoughts. Eventually, I learned that the alien was not identified by her body, but by her personality, so to speak. She was known by her fellow aliens as Airl. This is the closest word I can use to describe the name using the English alphabet. I sensed that she preferred the feminine gender. I think we shared a natural female empathy and nurturing attitude toward life and each other. I am sure she did not feel comfortable with the combative, aggressive, domineering attitude of the male officers and agents, each of whom was more concerned with their own personal self-importance and power than with discovering the secrets of the universe. When I entered the room, she was very pleased to see me. I felt a very genuine sense of recognition, relief, and a warm feeling from her. It was like the eager excitement and unconditional platonic affection one feels from a dog or a child, yet with a calm and reserved control. I must say that I was surprised that I felt the same sort of affection for the alien being, especially since we had spent so little time with each other. I was pleased that I was able to continue my interviews with her in spite of all the attention it was getting from the stream of government and military people arriving at the base. It was very obvious that the people who wrote the next series of questions for me wanted to learn how to communicate with the alien themselves without having to go through me. Here are the answers to the new list of questions. Official transcript of interview, top secret. Official transcript of the U.S. Army Air Force Roswell Army Airfield 509th Bomb Group. Subject, alien interview, July 11th, 1947. Question, can you read or write any Earth languages? Answer, no. Question, do you understand numbers or mathematics? Answer, yes, I'm an officer, pilot, engineer. Question, can you write or draw symbols or pictures that we may be able to translate into our own language? Answer, uncertain. Question, are there any other signs or means of communication you can use to help us understand your thoughts more clearly? Answer, no. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, personal note. I was very sure that this was not true, but I understand clearly that Airl was not willing to communicate in writing or drawing or sign language. My feeling was that she was following orders like any soldier who had been captured, not to reveal any information that might be useful to an enemy, even under torture. She was only able and willing to reveal non-confidential or personal information or name, rank, and serial number. Official transcript of interview, top secret. Official transcript of the U.S. Army Air Force Roswell Army Airfield 509th Bomb Group. Subject, alien interview, July 11th, 1947, second session. Question, can you show us on a map of the stars which is the star of your home planet? Answer, no. This is not because she does not know the directions from Earth to her home planet. She was unwilling to reveal the location. It was also due to the fact that the star system of her home planet does not exist on any star map on Earth. It's too far away. Question, how long will it take your people to locate you here? Answer, unknown. Question, how long would it take your people to travel here to rescue you? Answer, minutes or hours. Question, how can we make them understand that we do not intend to harm you? Answer, intentions are clear. See in your mind. Images, feelings. Question, if you are not a biological entity, why do you refer to yourself as feminine? Answer, I am a creator, mother, source. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, personal note. These questions only took me a few minutes to complete. I realized then that we may be in for some serious trouble if the alien was not willing to cooperate or reveal any information that the military or intelligence agencies or scientists consider to be useful to them. I was also sure that the alien was very certain of the actual intentions of the people who wrote these questions, as she could read their minds just as easily as she could read my thoughts and communicate with me telepathically. Because of these intentions, she was unwilling and unable to cooperate with any of them in any way under any circumstances. And I am equally sure that since she is not a biological life form, that there was no kind of torture or coercion that would change her mind. Roswell, Alien Interview, Chapter 4, The Language Barrier. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, personal note. After I explained what I thought were the reasons for the no answer to the intelligence agents, there was a great deal of upset and turmoil. A very heated discussion took place between some of the intelligence officers, military officials, psychologists, and the language interpreters. This lasted for several hours. It was finally decided that I should be allowed to continue to interview the alien, provided I could get a satisfactory answer from her to the following question. Official transcript of interview, top secret. Official transcript of the U.S. Army Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, 509th Bomb Group. Subject, alien interview, July 11th, 1947, third session. Question. What assurance or proof do you require from us that will make you feel safe enough to answer our questions? Answer. Only she speaks, only she hears. Only she questions, no others. Must learn, know, understand. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, personal note. When I returned to the interview room to report the alien response to this question, I received a grim and skeptical reception from the assembled intelligence agents and military personnel. They could not understand what the alien meant by this. I admitted that I really couldn't understand what she meant either, but I was doing the best that I could to articulate her telepathic intentions. I told the officials that perhaps the communication problem had to do with my inability to understand the telepathic language of the alien clearly enough to be satisfactory. I was so discouraged at that point I almost felt like giving up. And now there was even more arguments than before. I was sure I was going to be removed from my position in spite of the fact that the alien refused to communicate with anyone else, or that no one else had been found who could communicate with her. Fortunately, a very clever fellow named John Newble, who was a Japanese language specialist from the Navy, had an explanation and a solution to the problem. He explained that first the problem had very little to do with the inability of the alien to communicate. It had more to do with her unwillingness to communicate with anyone other than myself. Second, in order for any clear, comprehensive communication to happen, both parties needed to understand and communicate through a common language. Words and symbols in language convey very precise concepts and meanings. He said that the Japanese people have a lot of homonyms in their language which cause a lot of confusion in day-to-day communication. They solve this problem by using standard Chinese characters to write down the exact meaning of the word they are using. This clears up the matter for them. Without a defined nomenclature, communication was not possible beyond the rudimentary understanding between men and dogs or between two small children. The lack of a common vocabulary of clearly defined words that all parties can use fluently was the limiting factor in communication between all people, groups, or nations. Therefore, he suggested that there were only two choices. I had to learn to speak the language of the alien, or the alien had to learn to speak English. Factually, only one choice was possible, that I persuade Airl to learn English, and that I teach it to her with the guidance of the language specialist. No one had any objection to trying this approach, as there were no other suggestions. The language specialists suggested that I take several children's books and a basic reading primer and grammar text with me into the interview room. The plan was that I would sit next to the alien and read aloud to her from the books, while pointing to the text I was reading with my finger so that she could follow along. The theory was that the alien could eventually be taught to read just as a child is taught to read, by word and sound association with the written word, as well as instruction in fundamental grammar. They also assumed, I think, that if the alien was intelligent enough to communicate with me telepathically and fly a spacecraft across the galaxy, that she could probably learn to speak a language as quickly as a 5-year-old or faster. I returned to the interview room and proposed this idea to Airl. She did not object to learning the language, although she did not make any commitment to answer questions either. No one else had a better idea, so we went ahead. Roswell, Alien Interview, Chapter 5, Reading Lessons, Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, Personal Note. I began the reading lessons with the first pages of a book that had been used to teach pioneer children in the 1800s on the frontiers of America. It is called McGuffey's Eclectic Reader, Primer through 6th. Since I am a nurse and not a teacher, the language expert who gave me the books also gave me an extensive briefing. a course that took an entire day, on how to use the books to teach the alien. He said the reason he chose these particular books was because the original 1836 version of these books were used for 3/4 of a century to teach about 4/5 of all American school children how to read. No other books ever had so much influence over American children for so long. McGuffey's educational course begins in the primer by presenting the letters of the alphabet to be memorized in sequence. Children were then taught step by step to use the building blocks of the language to form and pronounce words using the phonics method, which involves teaching children to connect sounds with letters. Each lesson begins with a study of the words used in the reading exercise, and with markings to show the correct pronunciation for each word. I discovered that the stories in the first and second readers picture children in their relationship with family members, teachers, friends, and animals. The third, fourth, fifth, and sixth readers expanded on those ideas. One of the stories I remember was The Widow and the Merchant. It's kind of a morality tale about a merchant who befriends a widow in need. Later, when the widow proves herself to be honest, the merchant gives her a nice gift. The books do not necessarily teach you to believe that charity is expected only of wealthy, though. We all know that generosity is a virtue that should be practiced by everyone. All of the stories were very wholesome, and they gave very good explanations to illustrate virtues like honesty, charity, thrift, hard work, courage, patriotism, reverence for God, and respect for parents. Personally, I would recommend this book to anyone. I also discovered that the vocabulary used in the book was very advanced compared to the relatively limited number of words people use commonly in our modern age. I think that we have lost a lot of our own language since our founding fathers wrote the Declaration of Independence over 200 years ago. As instructed, I sat next to Airl in the interview room, reading aloud to her from each successive book in the series of the McGuffey Readers. Each of the books had excellent, simple illustrations of the stories and subjects being taught, although they are very outdated by today's standards. Nonetheless, Airl seemed to understand and absorb every word, sound, syllable, and meaning as we progressed. We continued this process for 14 hours a day for 3 consecutive days without interruption, except for a few meals and rest breaks on my part. Airl did not take breaks for anything. She did not sleep. Instead, she remained sitting in the overstuffed chair in the interview room, reviewing the lessons we had already covered. When I returned each morning to begin where we'd left off, she had already memorized the previous lessons and was well into the next pages. This pattern continued to accelerate until it became pointless for me to continue reading to her. Although Airl did not have a mouth to speak with, she was now able to think at me in English. At the end of these lessons, Airl was able to read and study by herself. I showed her how to use a dictionary to look up new words she encountered. Airl consulted the dictionary continually after that. From then on, my job was acting as a courier for her, requesting that reference books be brought to her in a steady stream. Next, Mr. Newble brought in a set of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Airl especially enjoyed this because it had a lot of pictures. After that, she requested many more picture books and reference books with photographs and drawings, because it was much easier to understand the meaning if she could see a picture of the thing she was studying. Over the next 6 days, books were brought in from libraries all over the country, I presume, because it wasn't more than a few more days before she had read through several hundred of them. She studied every subject I could imagine, and many other very technical things I never wanted to know anything about, like astronomy, metallurgy, engineering, mathematics, various technical manuals, and so forth. Later she began to read fiction books, novels, poetry, and the classics of literature. Airl also asked to read a great many books on the subjects in the humanities, especially history. I think she must have read at least 50 books about human history and archaeology. Of course, I made sure that she received a copy of the Holy Bible also, which she read from cover to cover without comment or questions. Although I continued to stay with Airl for 12 to 14 hours each day, most of that time during the following week had been spent without much communication between us, except for an occasional question she asked me. The questions were usually meant to give her a sense of context or to clarify something in the books she was reading. Oddly, Airl told me that her favorite books were Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Don Quixote's de la Mancha, and 1001 Nights. She said the authors of these stories showed that it is more important to have a great spirit and imagination than great skill or power. I could not answer a lot of her questions, so I consulted with people in the outer rooms for answers. Most of these had to do with technical and scientific things. A few of her questions were about the humanities. The depth of complex understanding and subtlety of her questions showed that she had a very penetrating intellect. Personally, I think she had already known a lot more about the culture and history of Earth than she was willing to admit when we started. I would soon discover how much more. Roswell, Alien Interview, Chapter 6, My Education Begins. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy personal note. By the 15th day after rescuing Airl from the crash site, I was able to communicate fluidly and effortlessly with her in English. She had absorbed so much more written material by this time that her academic education far exceeded my own. Although I graduated from high school in Los Angeles in 1940 and attended college for 4 years of pre-medical and nursing training, the variety of my own reading had been fairly limited. I had not studied most of the subjects to which Airl had now been exposed, especially considering her acute understanding, very intense study habits, and a nearly photographic memory. She was able to recall long passages from books she read. She was especially fond of sections of her favorite stories from classic literature like The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Tales from Gulliver's Travels, and Peter Pan, and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. By this time Airl had become the teacher and I was the student. I was about to learn what men of Earth don't know and have no way of knowing. The throng of scientists and agents who observed us through the one-way glass of our interview room, whom Airl and I now referred to as the gallery, were growing increasingly impatient to ask her questions. But Airl continued to refuse to allow any questions to be asked of her by anyone other than myself, even vicariously through me as an interpreter or in writing. On the afternoon of the 16th day, Airl and I sat next to each other as she read. She closed the last page of a book she was reading and placed it aside. I was about to hand her the next book from a large pile waiting to be read, when she turned and said, or thought to me, "I'm ready to speak now." At first I was a little confused by the remark. I gestured for her to continue, and she began to teach me my first lesson. Official transcript of interview, top secret. Official transcript of the U.S. Army Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, 59th Bomb Group. Subject, alien interview, July 24th, 1947. First session. "What would you like to say, Airl?" I asked. "I have been part of a domain expeditionary force in this sector of space for several thousand years. However, I have not personally had intimate contact with beings on Earth since 5965 BCE. It is not my primary function to interact with inhabitants of planets within the domain. I am an officer, pilot, and engineer, with many duties to perform. Nonetheless, although I'm fluent in 347 other languages within the domain, I have not been exposed to your English language. The last Earth language with which I was conversant was the Sanskrit language of the Vedic hymns. At that time I was a member of a mission sent to investigate the loss of a domain base located in the Himalaya Mountains. An entire battalion of officers, pilots, communications, and administrative personnel disappeared and the base destroyed. Several million years ago, I was trained and served as an investigation, data evaluation, and program development officer for the domain. Because I was experienced in that technology, I was sent to Earth as part of a search team. One of my duties involved interrogation of the human population that inhabited the adjoining area at that time. Many of the people in that region reported sighting Vimanas, or spacecraft, in the area. Following the logical extension of evidence, testimony, observation, as well as the absence of certain evidence, I led my team to the discovery that there were still Old Empire ships and well-hidden Old Empire installations in this solar system of which we had been completely unaware. You and I were unable to communicate in your language because I personally have not been exposed to your language. However, now that I have scanned the books and the material you provided me, this data has been relayed to our space station in this region and processed by our communications officer through our computers. It has been translated into my own language and relayed back to me in a context that I can think with. I have also received additional information from the files stored in our computers about the English language and domain records concerning Earth civilization. Now I'm prepared to give you certain information that I feel will be of great value to you. I will tell you the truth. Although truth is relative to all other truth, I wish to share with you as honestly and accurately as possible truth as I see it within the boundaries of my integrity to myself, to my race, and without violating my obligations to the organization I serve and have sworn to uphold and protect. Okay, I thought. Will you answer questions from the gallery now? No, I will not answer questions. I will provide information to you that I think will be beneficial to the well-being of the immortal, spiritual beings who comprise humanity, and that will foster the survival of all the myriad life forms and the environment of Earth, as it is a part of my mission to ensure the preservation of Earth. Personally, it is my conviction that all sentient beings are immortal spiritual beings. This includes human beings. For the sake of accuracy and simplicity, I will use a made-up word, is-be, because the primary nature of an immortal being is that we live in a timeless state of is, and the only reason for their existence is that they decide to be. No matter how lowly their station in a society, every is-be deserves the respect and treatment that I myself would like to receive from others. Each person on Earth continues to be an is-be, whether they are aware of the fact or not. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, personal note. I will never forget this conversation. Her tone was very matter-of-fact and emotionless. However, for the first time I sensed the presence of a warm and real personality in Airl. Her reference to immortal spiritual beings struck me like a flash of light in a dark room. I had never before considered that a human being could be an immortal being. I thought that status or power was reserved solely for the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And because I am a devout Catholic and subject to the word of the Lord Jesus and the Holy Father, I have never thought of a woman as an immortal spiritual being either, not even the Holy Mother Mary. Yet when Airl thought that thought, I became vividly aware for the first time that she personally was an immortal spiritual being, and so are we all. Airl said that she sensed that I was confused about the idea. She said she would demonstrate to me that I am also an immortal spiritual being. She said, "Be above your body." Immediately I realized that I was outside of my body, looking down from the ceiling at the top of my body's head. I was also able to see the room around me, including Airl's body, sitting in the chair next to my own body. After a moment I realized the simple but shocking reality that I am not a body. In that moment a black veil lifted, and for the first time in my life, and for a very long time into the past, I realized that I am not my soul, but that I am me, a spiritual being. This was an unexplainable epiphany, but one that fills me with joy and relief I cannot recall having experienced ever before. As for the immortal part, I do not understand her meaning, as I have always been taught that I am not immortal, a spirit perhaps, but certainly not immortal. After a moment, I'm not sure how long, Airl asked me if I had a better understanding of the idea. Suddenly, I was back inside my body again and said out loud, "Yes, I see what you mean." I was so taken aback by the experience that I had to get up from my chair and walk around the room for a few minutes. I made an excuse that I needed to get a drink of water and go to the restroom, which I did. In the restroom, I looked at myself in the mirror. I used the toilet, refreshed my makeup, and straightened my uniform. After 10 or 15 minutes, I felt more normal again and returned to the interview room. After that, I felt as though I was no longer an interpreter for Airl. I felt as though I was a kindred spirit. I felt like I was safe at home with a trusted friend or a family member, as close as any I had ever had. Airl sensed and understood my confusion about the concept of personal immortality. She began her first lesson with me by explaining this to me. Official transcript of interview continued. Airl told me her reasons for coming to Earth and for being in the area of the 509th Bomber Squadron. She was sent by her superior officers to investigate the explosions of nuclear weapons, which have been tested in New Mexico. Her superiors ordered her to gather information from the atmosphere that could be used to determine the extent of radiation and potential harm this might cause to the environment. During her mission, the spacecraft was struck by a lightning, which caused her to lose control and crash. The spacecraft is operated by IS-BEs, who use doll bodies in much the same way that an actor wears a mask and costume. It is like a mechanical tool through which to operate in the physical world. She, as well as all the other IS-BEs of the officer class and their superiors, inhabit these doll bodies when they are on duty in space. When they are not on duty, they leave the body and operate, think, communicate, travel, and exist without the use of a body. The bodies are constructed of synthetic materials, including a very sensitive electrical nervous system, to which each IS-BE adjusts themselves or tune in to an electronic wavelength that is matched uniquely to the wavelength or frequency emitted by each IS-BE. Each IS-BE is capable of creating a unique wave frequency which identifies them much like a radio signal frequency. This serves in part as identification like a fingerprint. The doll body acts like a radio receiver for the IS-BE. No two frequencies or doll bodies are exactly the same. The bodies of each IS-BE crew member are likewise tuned into and connected to a nervous system built into the spacecraft. The spacecraft is built in much the same way as the doll body. It is adjusted specifically to the frequency of each IS-BE crew member. Therefore, the craft can be operated by the thoughts or energy emitted by the IS-BE. It is really a very simple direct control system, so there are no complicated controls or navigation equipment on board the spacecraft. They operate as an extension of the IS-BE. When the lightning bolt struck the spacecraft, this caused a short circuit and consequently disconnected them from the control of the ship momentarily, which resulted in the crash. Airl was and still is an officer, pilot, and an engineer in an expeditionary force which is part of a space opera civilization which refers to itself as the Domain. This civilization controls the vast number of galaxies, stars, planets, moons, and asteroids throughout an area of space that is approximately 1/4 of the entire physical universe. The continuing mission of her organization is to secure, control, and expand the territory and resources of the Domain. Airl pointed out that their own activities were very similar in many ways to the European explorers who discovered and claimed the New World for the Holy Father, the Pope, and for the kings of Spain, Portugal, and later Holland, England, France, and so forth. Europe benefited from the property acquired from the native inhabitants. However, the native inhabitants were never consulted with or asked for their permission to become a part of the domain of the European nations and the soldiers and priests they sent to acquire territory and wealth in order to advance their interests. Airl said she read in a history book that the Spanish king regretted the brutal treatment of the native inhabitants by his soldiers. He feared retribution from the gods he worshipped, as described in the various testaments of the Bible. He asked the Pope to prepare a statement called the Requirement, which was supposed to be read to each of the newly encountered native inhabitants. The king hoped that the statement, whether it was accepted or rejected by the natives, would absolve the king of all responsibility for the resulting slaughter and enslavement of these people. He used this statement as justification to confiscate their lands and possessions by his soldiers and the Pope's priests. Apparently, the Pope, personally, did not have any feelings of guilt or responsibility in the matter. Airl thought that such actions were those of a coward, and that it is no surprise that the territory of Spain was diminished so quickly. Only a few years later the king was dead, and his empire had been assimilated by other nations. Airl said that this sort of behavior does not occur in the domain. Their leaders assume full responsibility for the actions of the domain and would not denigrate themselves in this fashion, nor do they fear any gods or have any regret for their actions. This idea reinforces my earlier suggestion that Airl and her people are probably atheists. In the case of the acquisition of Earth by the domain, the rulers of the domain have chosen not to openly reveal this intention to their native inhabitants of Earth until a later time when it may or may not suit their interest to reveal themselves. For the present time, it is not strategically necessary to make the presence of the domain expeditionary force known to mankind. In fact, until now, it has been very aggressively hidden for reasons that will be revealed later. The asteroid belt near Earth is very small, but important location for the domain in this part of space. Actually, some of the objects in our solar system are very valuable for their use as low-gravity space stations. They are interested primarily in the low-gravity satellites in this solar system, which consists mainly of the side of the moon facing away from Earth and the asteroid belt, which is a planet that was destroyed billions of years ago, and to a lesser degree Mars and Venus. Dome structures synthesized from gypsum or underground bases covered by electromagnetic force fields are easily constructed to house the domain forces. Once an area of space is acquired by the domain and becomes a part of the territory under its control, it is treated as the property of the domain. The space station near the planet Earth is important only because it lay along a path of the domain expansion route toward the center of the Milky Way galaxy and beyond. Of course, everyone in the domain is aware of this, except for the people of Earth. Roswell, Alien Interview, Chapter 7, A Lesson in Ancient History. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, Personal Note. My instruction with Airl continued through the night until dawn of the next morning. I must say that I was fascinated, skeptical, shocked, alarmed, dismayed, and disgruntled by the lesson I was getting from Airl. I could never have imagined any of what she was telling me, not even in my wildest dreams and nightmares. The next afternoon, after I had slept, showered, and eaten, I was debriefed about my interview session the previous evening by members of the gallery who recorded my account of what Airl told me. There was a stenographer present for this session as usual, to whom I debriefed after each interview, and there were also 6 or 7 men who asked for clarification of my statements. As always, there was constant pressure applied to me to use my influence with Airl to persuade her to answer specific questions prompted by members of the gallery. I did my best to reassure everyone that I would give my very best efforts to do so. Nevertheless, only 3 things happened every day thereafter. Airl resolutely refused to answer any questions that she sensed had been posed by or suggested to me by the gallery. 2. Airl continued to instruct me in the subject matter of her own choice. 3. Every evening after my interview with or instruction from Airl, she would give me a new list of subject matter about which she wanted more information. Each evening I presented this list to the gallery. The next day Airl received a large stack of books, magazines, articles, and so forth. She would study all of these during the night while I slept. This pattern repeated every day during the remainder of the time I spent with her. The subject matter of my next interview or lesson from Airl continued with a brief history of Earth, our solar system, and nearby space from the perspective of the domain. Official transcript of interview, top secret. Official transcript of the U.S. Army Air Force Roswell Army Airfield 509th Bomb Group. Subject Alien Interview, July 25, 1947, first session. Before you can understand the subject of history, you must first understand the subject of time. Time is simply an arbitrary measurement of the motion of objects through space. Space is not linear. Space is determined by point of view of an IS-BE when viewing an object. The distance between an IS-BE and the object being viewed is called space. Objects or energy masses in space do not necessarily move in a linear fashion. In this universe, objects tend to move randomly or in a curving or cyclical pattern, or as determined by agreed-upon rules. History is not only a linear record of events, as many authors of Earth history books imply, because it is not a string that can be stretched out and marked like a measuring tool. History is a subjective observation of the movement of objects through space, recorded from the point of view of a survivor rather than those who succumbed. Events occur interactively and concurrently, just as the biological body has a heart that pumps blood while the lungs provide oxygen to the cells, which reproduce using energy from the sun and chemicals from plants at the same time as the liver strains toxic wastes from the blood and eliminates them through the bladder and the bowels. All of these interactions are concurrent and simultaneous. Although time runs consecutively, events do not happen in an independent linear stream. In order to view and understand the history or reality of the past, one must view all the events as part of an interactive whole. Time can also be sensed as a vibration, which is uniform throughout the entire physical universe. Airl explained that IS-BEs have been around since before the beginning of the universe. The reason that they are called immortal is because a spirit is not born and cannot die, but exists in a personally postulated perception of is, will be. She was careful to explain that every spirit is not the same. Each is completely unique in identity, power, awareness, and ability. The difference between an IS-BE like Airl and most of the IS-BEs inhabiting bodies on Earth is that Airl can enter and depart from her doll at will. She can perceive at selective depths through matter. Airl and other officers of the domain can communicate telepathically. Since an IS-BE is not a physical universe entity, it has no location in space or time. An IS-BE is literally immaterial. They can span great distances of space instantly. They can experience sensations more intensely than a biological body without the use of physical sensory mechanisms. An IS-BE can exclude pain from their perception. Airl can also remember her identity, so to speak, all the way back into the dim mists of time for trillions of years. She says that the existing collection of suns in this immediate vicinity of the universe have been burning for the last 200 trillion years. The age of the physical universe is nearly infinitely old, but probably at least 4 quadrillion years since its earliest beginnings. Time is a difficult factor to measure as it depends on the subjective memory of IS-BEs, and there has been no uniform record of events throughout the physical universe since it began. As on Earth, there are many different time measurement systems defined by various cultures, which use cycles of motion and points of origin to establish age and duration. The physical universe itself is formed from the convergence and amalgamation of many other individual universes, each of which were created by an IS-BE or group of IS-BEs. The collision of these illusionary universes commingled and coalesced and were solidified to form a mutually created universe. Because it is agreed that energy and forms can be created but not destroyed, this creative process has continued to form an ever-expanding universe of nearly infinite physical proportions. Before the formation of the physical universe, there was a vast period during which universes were not solid, but wholly illusionary. You might say that the universe was a universe of magic illusions, which were made to appear and vanish at the will of the magician. In every case, the magician was one or more IS-BEs. Many IS-BEs on Earth can still recall vague images from that period. Tales of magic, sorcery, and enchantment, fairy tales and mythology speak of such things, although in very crude terms. Each IS-BE entered into the physical universe when they lost their own home universe. That is, when an IS-BE's home universe was overwhelmed by the physical universe, or when the IS-BE joined with other IS-BEs to create or conquer the physical universe. On Earth, the ability to determine when an IS-BE entered the physical universe is difficult for 2 reasons. 1, the memory of IS-BEs on Earth have been erased, and 2, IS-BEs' arrival or invasion into the physical universe took place at different times, some 60 trillion years ago, and others only 3 trillion. Every once in a short while, a few million years, an area or planet will be taken over by another group of IS-BEs entering into the area. Sometimes they will capture other IS-BEs as slaves. They will be forced to inhabit bodies to perform menial or manual work, especially mining mineral ores on heavy gravity planets such as Earth. Airl says that she has been a member of the Domain Expeditionary Force for more than 625 million years. When she became a pilot for a biological survey mission, which included occasional visits to Earth. She can remember her entire career there and for a very long time before that. She told me that Earth scientists do not have an accurate measuring system to gauge the age of matter. They assume that because certain types of materials seem to deteriorate rather quickly, such as organic or carbon-based matter, that there is a deterioration of matter. It is not accurate to measure the age of stone based on the measurement of the age of wood or bone. This is a fundamental error. Factually, matter does not deteriorate. It cannot be destroyed. Matter can only be altered in form, but it is never truly destroyed. The Domain has conducted a periodic survey of the galaxies in this sector of the universe since it developed space travel technologies about 80 trillion years ago. A review of changes in the complexion of Earth revealed that mountain ranges rise and fall, continents change location, the poles of the planet shift, ice caps come and go, oceans appear and disappear, rivers, valleys, and canyons change. In all cases the matter is the same. It is always the same sand. Every form and substance is made of the same basic materials which never deteriorates. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, personal note. I cannot even begin to imagine how advanced a civilization may have become technically and mentally after trillions of years. Just think of how advanced our own country has become compared to only 150 years ago. Only a few generations ago, transportation was on foot, horseback, or boat. Reading was done by candlelight, heating and cooking were done over a fireplace, and there wasn't any indoor plumbing. Official transcript of interview. Airl described the abilities of an IS-BE officer of the Domain to me, and she demonstrated one to me when she contacted telepathically a communications officer of the Domain who was stationed in the asteroid belt. The asteroid belt is composed of thousands of broken-up pieces of a planet that once existed between Mars and Jupiter. It serves as a good low-gravity jumping-off point for incoming spacecraft traveling toward the center of our galaxy. She requested that this officer consult information stored in the files of the Domain concerning the history of Earth. She asked the communications officer to feed this information to Airl. The communications officer immediately complied with the request. Based on the information stored in the files of the Domain, Airl was able to give me a brief overview of our history lesson. This is what Airl told me that the Domain had observed about the history of Earth. She told me that the Domain Expeditionary Force first entered into the Milky Way galaxy very recently, only about 10,000 years ago. The first action was to conquer the home planets of the Old Empire. This is not the official name, but a nickname given to the conquered civilization by the Domain forces that served as the seat of central government for this galaxy and other adjoining regions of space. These planets are located in the stars systems in the tail of the Big Dipper constellation. She did not mention which stars exactly. About 1,500 years later, the Domain began the installation bases for their own forces along the path of invasion which leads towards the center of the galaxy and beyond. About 8,200 years ago, the Domain forces set up a base on Earth in the Himalaya Mountains near the border of modern Pakistan and Afghanistan. This was a base for the battalion of the Domain Expeditionary Force, which included about 3,000 members. They set up a base under or inside the top of the mountain. The mountain top was drilled into and made hollow to create an area large enough to house the ships and personnel of that force. An electronic illusion of the mountaintop was created to hide the base by projecting a false image from inside the mountain against a force screen. The ships could then enter and exit through the force screen, yet remain unseen by Homo sapiens. Shortly after they settled there, the base was surprised by an attack from a remnant of the military forces of the old empire. Unbeknownst to the domain, a hidden underground base on Mars, operated by the old empire, had existed for a very long time. The domain base was wiped out by a military attack from the Mars base, and the IS-BEs of the domain expeditionary force were captured. You can imagine that the domain was very upset about losing such a large force of officers and crew, so they sent other crews to Earth to look for them. Those crews were also attacked. The captured IS-BEs from the domain forces were handled in the same fashion as all other IS-BEs who have been sent to Earth. They were each given amnesia, had their memories replaced with false pictures and hypnotic commands, and sent to Earth to inhabit biological bodies. They are still a part of the human population today. After a very persistent and extensive investigation into the loss of their crews, the domain discovered that Old World Empire has been operating a very extensive and very carefully hidden base of operations in this part of the galaxy for millions of years. No one knows exactly how long. Eventually the spacecraft of the Old Empire forces and the domain engaged each other in open combat in the space of the solar system. According to Airl, there was a running battle between the Old Empire forces and the domain until about 1235 AD, when the domain forces finally destroyed the last of the spacecraft of the Old Empire force in this area. The domain expeditionary force lost many of its own ships in this area during that time also. About 1,000 years later, the Old Empire base was discovered by accident in the spring of 1914 AD. About 1,000 years later, the Old Empire base was discovered by accident in the spring of 1914 AD. The discovery was made when the body of the Archduke of Austria was taken over by an officer of the domain expeditionary force. This officer, who was stationed in the asteroid belt, was sent to Earth on a routine mission to gather reconnaissance. The purpose of this takeover was to use the body as a disguise through which to infiltrate human society in order to gather information about current events on Earth. The officer, as an IS-BE, having greater power than the being inhabiting the body of the Archduke, simply pushed the being out and took over control of the body. However, this officer did not realize how much the Habsburgs were hated by feuding factions in the country, so he was caught off guard when the body of the Archduke was assassinated by the Bosnian student. The officer, or IS-BE, was suddenly knocked out of the body when it was shot by the assassin. Disoriented, the IS-BE inadvertently penetrated one of the amnesia force screens and was captured. Eventually, the domain discovered that a wide area of space is monitored by an electronic force field which controls all of the IS-BEs in this end of the galaxy, including Earth. The electronic force screen is designed to detect IS-BEs and prevent them from leaving the area. If an IS-BE attempts to penetrate the force screen, it captures them in a kind of electronic net. The result is that the captured IS-BE is subjected to very severe brainwashing treatment, which erases the memory of the IS-BE. This process uses a tremendous electrical shock, just like the Earth psychiatrists use electrical shock therapy to erase the memory and personality of a patient and to make them more cooperative. On Earth, this therapy uses only a few hundred volts of electricity. However, the electrical voltage used by the Old Empire operation against IS-BEs is on the order of magnitude of billions of volts. This tremendous shock completely wipes out all the memory of the IS-BE. The memory eraser is not just for one life or one body. It wipes out all the accumulated experiences of a nearly infinite past, as well as the identity of the IS-BE. The shock was intended to make it impossible for the IS-BE to remember who they are, where they came from, their knowledge or skills, their memory of the past, and ability to function as a spiritual entity. They are overwhelmed into becoming a mindless, robotic non-entity. After the shock, a series of post-hypnotic suggestions are used to install false memories and a false time orientation in each IS-BE. This includes the command to return to the base after the body dies, so that the same kind of shock and hypnosis can be done again and again and again forever. The hypnotic command also tells the patient to forget to remember. What the domain learned from the experience of this officer is that the old empire has been using Earth as a prison planet for a very long time. Exactly how long is unknown, perhaps millions of years. So when the body of the IS-BE dies, they depart from the body. They are detected by the force screen, they are captured, and ordered by hypnotic command to return to the light. The idea of heaven and the afterlife are part of the hypnotic suggestion, a part of the treachery which makes the whole mechanism work. After the IS-BE has been shocked and hypnotized to erase the memory of the life just lived, the IS-BE is immediately commanded hypnotically to report back to the Earth as though they were on a secret mission to inhabit a new body. Each IS-BE is told that they have a special purpose for being on Earth, but of course there is no purpose for being in a prison, at least not for the prisoner. Any undesirable IS-BEs who are sentenced to Earth were classified as untouchable by the old empire. This included anyone that the old empire judged to be criminals who are too vicious to be reformed or subdued, as well as other criminals such as sex perverts or beings unwilling to do any productive work. An untouchable classification of IS-BEs also includes a variety of political prisoners. This includes IS-BEs who are considered to be non-compliant freethinkers or revolutionaries who make trouble for the governments of the various planets of the old empire. Of course, anyone with a previous military record against the old empire is also shipped off to Earth. A list of untouchables includes artists, painters, singers, musicians, writers, actors, and performers of every kind. For this reason, Earth has more artists per capita than any other planet in the old empire. Untouchables also include intellectuals, inventors, and geniuses in almost every field. Since everything the old empire considers valuable has long since been invented or created over the last few trillion years, they have no further use for such beings. This includes skilled managers also, which are not needed in a society of obedient robotic citizens. Anyone who is not willing or able to submit to mindless economic, political, and religious servitude as a tax-paying worker in the class system of the old empire are untouchable and sentenced to receive memory wipeout and permanent imprisonment on Earth. The next result is that an IS-BE is unable to escape because they can't remember who they are, where they came from, where they are. They have been hypnotized to think that they are someone, something, sometime, and somewhere other than where they really are. The domain officer who was assassinated while in the body of Archduke of Austria was likewise captured by the old empire force. Because this particular officer was a high-powered IS-BE compared to most, he was taken away to a secret old empire base under the surface of the planet Mars. They put him into a special electronic prison cell and held him there. Fortunately, this domain officer was able to escape from the underground base after 27 years in captivity. When he escaped from the old empire base, he returned immediately to his own base in the asteroid belt. His commanding officer ordered that a battle cruiser be dispatched to the coordinates of that base provided by this officer and to destroy that base completely. This old empire base was located a few hundred miles north of the equator on Mars in the Cydonia region. Although the military base of the old empire was destroyed, unfortunately much of the vast machinery of the IS-BE force screens, the electroshock, amnesia, hypnosis machinery, continues to function in other undiscovered locations right up to the present moment. The main base or control center for this mind control prison operation has never been found, so the influences of this base or bases are still in effect. The domain has observed that since the old empire space forces were destroyed, there is no one left to actively prevent other planetary systems from bringing their own untouchable IS-BEs to Earth from all over this galaxy and from other galaxies nearby. Therefore, Earth has become a universal dumping ground for this entire region of space. This in part explains the very unusual mix of races, cultures, languages, moral codes, religious and political influences among the IS-BE population on Earth. The number and variety of heterogeneous societies on Earth are extremely unusual on a normal planet. Most Sun-type 12 Class 7 planets are inhabited by only one humanoid body type or race, if any. In addition, most of the ancient civilizations of Earth and many of the events of Earth have been heavily influenced by the hidden hypnotic operation of the old Empire base. So far, no one has figured out exactly where and how this operation is run, or by whom, because it is so heavily protected by screens and traps. Furthermore, there has been no operation undertaken to seek out, discover, and destroy the vast and ancient network of electronics machinery that create the IS-BE force screens at this end of the galaxy. Until this has been done, we are not able to prevent or interrupt the electric shock operation, hypnosis, and remote thought control of the old Empire prison planet. Of course, all the crew members of the Domain Expeditionary Force now remain aware of this phenomena at all times while operating in this solar system space, so as to prevent detection and the capture by old Empire traps. Roswell, Alien Interview, Chapter 8, A Lesson in Recent History. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, personal note. This interview taught me a history lesson I will never read in any textbook written on Earth. The Domain has a much different view of events than we do. Official transcript of interview, top secret. Official transcript of the U.S. Army Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, 509th Bomb Group. Subject, Alien Interview, July 26, 1947, first session. The Domain Expeditionary Force has observed the resurgence in science and culture of the Western world since 1150 AD, when the remaining remnants of the space fleet of the old empire in this solar system were destroyed. The influence of the remote control hypnosis operation diminished slightly after that time, but still remains largely in force. Apparently a small amount of damage was done to the old world remote mind control operation, which resulted in a small decrease in the power of this mechanism. As a result, some memory of technologies that IS-BEs already knew before they came to Earth started to be remembered. Thereafter, the oppression of knowledge that is called the Dark Ages in Europe began to diminish after that time. Since then, the knowledge of the basic laws of physics and electricity have revolutionized Earth culture virtually overnight. The ability to remember technology by many of the geniuses in the IS-BE population of Earth was partially restored, when not so actively suppressed as it was before 1150 AD. Sir Isaac Newton is one of the best examples of this. In only a few decades, he single-handedly reinvented several major and fundamental scientific and mathematic principles. The men who remembered these sciences already knew them before they were sent to Earth. Ordinarily, no one would ever observe or discover as much about science and mathematics in a single lifetime, or even a few hundred lifetimes. These subjects have taken civilians billions and billions of years to create. IS-BEs on Earth have only just begun to remember small fragments of all the technologies that exist throughout the universe. Theoretically, if the amnesia mechanisms being used against Earth could be broken entirely, IS-BEs would regain all their memory. Unfortunately, similar advances have not been seen in the humanities, as the IS-BEs of Earth continue to behave very badly toward each other. This behavior, however, is heavily influenced by the hypnotic commands given to each IS-BE between lifetimes, and the very unusual combination of inmates on Earth, criminals, perverts, artists, revolutionaries, and geniuses, is the cause of a very restive and tumultuous environment. The purpose of the prison planet is to keep IS-BEs on Earth forever. Promoting ignorance, superstition, and war between IS-BEs helps keep the prison population crippled and trapped behind the wall of electronic force screens. IS-BEs have been dumped on Earth from all over the galaxy, adjoining galaxies, and from planetary systems all over the old empire, like Sirius, Aldebaran, the Pleiades, Orion, Draconis, and countless others. There are IS-BEs on Earth from unnamed races, civilizations, cultural backgrounds, and planetary environments. Each of the various IS-BE populations have their own language, belief systems, moral values, religious beliefs, training, and unknown and untold histories. These IS-BEs are mixed together with earlier inhabitants of Earth who came from another star system more than 400,000 years ago to establish the civilizations of Atlantis and Lemuria. Those civilizations vanished beneath the tidal waves caused by a planetary polar shift many thousands of years ago, before the current prison population started to arrive. Apparently, the IS-BEs from those star systems were the source of the original Oriental races of Earth, beginning in Australia. On the other hand, the civilizations set up on Earth by the Old Empire prison system were very different from the civilization of the Old Empire itself, which is an electronic space opera, atomic-powered conglomeration of earlier civilizations that were conquered with nuclear weapons and colonized by IS-BEs from another galaxy. The bureaucracy that controlled the former Old Empire was from an ancient space opera society run by a totalitarian confederation of planetary governments, regulated by a brutal social, economic, and political hierarchy, with a royal monarch as its figurehead. This type of government emerges with regularity on planets where the citizens abandon personal responsibility for autonomous self-regulation. They frequently lose their freedom to demented IS-BEs who suffer from an overwhelming paranoia that every other IS-BE is their enemy who must be controlled or destroyed. Their closest friends and allies, whom they espouse to love and cherish, are literally loved to death by them. Because such IS-BEs exist, the domain has learned that freedom must be won and maintained through eternal vigilance and the ability to use defensive force to maintain it. As a result, the domain has already conquered the governing planet of the Old Empire. The civilization of the domain, although considerably younger and smaller in size, is already more powerful, better organized, and united by an egalitarian esprit de corps never known in the history of the Old Empire. The recently despoiled German totalitarian state on Earth was similar to the Old Empire, but not nearly as brutal, and about 10,000 times less powerful. Many of the IS-BEs on Earth are here because they are violently opposed to the totalitarian government, or because they were so psychotically vicious that they could not be controlled by the Old Empire government. Consequently, the population of Earth is disproportionately comprised of a very high percentage of such beings. The conflicting cultural and ethical moral codes of the IS-BEs on Earth is unusual in the extreme. The domain conquest of the central Old Empire planets was fought with electronic cannon. The citizens of the planet forming the core of government for the Old Empire are a filthy, degraded, slave society of mindless, tax-paying workers who practice cannibalism. Violent automotive racetracks and bloody Roman circus-type entertainments are their only amusements. Regardless of any reasonable justification we may have had for using atomic weapons to vanquish the planets of the Old Empire, the domain is careful not to ruin the resources of those planets by using weapons of crude radioactive force. The current U.S. civilization is beginning to mimic some of the trappings of that civilization, especially in the design of airplanes, automobiles, ships, trains, and telephones. Likewise, buildings in the cities of Earth are thought to be modern or futuristic if their design resembles the architecture of the Old Empire. The government of the Old Empire, before being supplanted by the domain, was comprised of beings who possessed a very craven intelligence, very much like the Axis powers during your recent World War. Those beings manifested precisely the same behavior as the galactic government that exiled them to external imprisonment on Earth. They were a gruesome reminder of the ageless maxim that an IS-BE will often manifest the treatment they have received from others. Kindness fosters kindness, cruelty begets cruelty. One must be able and willing to use force tempered with intelligence to prevent harm to the innocent. However, extraordinary understanding, self-discipline, and courage are required to effectively prevent brutality without being overwhelmed by the malice that World War II were recently revealed. Likewise, the IS-BEs of Earth are the victims of spiritual eradication and eternal slavery inside frail biological bodies, inspired by the same kind of craven hatred in the Old Empire. The kind and creative inmates of Earth are continuously tortured by butchers and lunatics who are controlled by the Old Empire prison operators. The so-called civilizations of Earth, far from the age of useless pyramids to the age of nuclear holocaust, have been a colossal waste of natural resources, a perverted use of intelligence, and an overt oppression of the spiritual essence of every single IS-BE on the planet. If the domain sent ships to every corner of the universe in search of hell, their quest could end on Earth. What greater brutality can be inflicted on anyone than to erase the spiritual awareness, identity, ability, and memory that is in the essence of oneself? The domain has as yet been unable to rescue the 3,000 IS-BEs of the Expeditionary Force Battalion either. They are forced to inhabit biological bodies on Earth. We have been able to recognize and track most of them for the past 8,000 years. However, our attempts to communicate with them are usually futile, as they are unable to remember their true identity. The majority of lost members of the domain force have followed the general progression of Western civilization from India into the Middle East, then to Chaldea and Babylon, into Egypt, through Achaia, Greece, Rome, into Europe, to the Western Hemisphere, and then around the world. The members of the Lost Battalion and many other IS-BEs on Earth could be valuable citizens of the domain, not including those who are vicious criminals or perverts. Unfortunately, there has been no workable method conceived to emancipate the IS-BEs from Earth. Therefore, as a matter of common logic as well as the official policy of the domain, it is safer and more sensible to avoid contact with the IS-BE population of Earth until such time as the proper resources can be allocated to locate and destroy the old Empire Force screen and amnesia machinery and develop a therapy to restore the memory of an IS-BE.